Hello, this is Scottish Independence Podcast episode number 184. Now, last time out, as it's an important theme at the moment, I gave you quite a lot of Tories lying and being nasty and other nefarious behaviour in general, but the other narrative we've been hearing a lot at the moment is, coronavirus kills, independence stone dead, which is just the most ridiculous argument you ever heard. In fact, if anything, it's shown the dysfunctional nature of the British state in a light that's even clearer than before. So what we're doing this time is a little bit different. We're going back to some speeches that have been made about Scottish independence a few years ago. Granted, some of them you'll have heard, some of them you won't. But tell me, can you find one of them in which the points made have changed, or the points made are not as valid as they once were? So that's the challenge. First up, a debate in Glasgow University.
The second thing I was looking forward to was hearing a positive case for the Union. I've devoted more of my life to the case for Scottish independence. I've listened to more of these debates probably than anyone else here. And one of the defining features of it has always been that there is a case, like it or not, a positive case for independence that has been constructed. Usually there has been nothing other than smears and fears, too poor, too stupid, out of time, isolation. We've heard it all. I see before me here 4 gentlemen I know and respect. I'm sorry, 3 down. And what I look forward to above everything else was to get an intelligent argument today, an acceptance that there is some onus on them to say that the Union is changing and therefore we say that this is the right model. Now let's just remember what that looks like, because Mr Blessing said that I would look at context, and I want to do that. And actually, Mr Lally gives me the in. One of his heroes, Keir Hardie. Let's just remember some of the history here. An election address in 1888, where Keir Hardie says a Scottish Parliament is just round the corner. 100 years later, with the usual Scottish Labour speed, we find ourselves with the claim of right. Nothing's happened. We move from there, and just think about the passage of time and how this quickens. We move from the claim of right and the Constitutional Convention, which incidentally enshrines the sovereignty of the Scottish people. We move forward to a referendum in 1997, a Scottish Parliament in 1999. We get to something that was never meant to happen, an SNP government in 2007, the first ever. We then have a national conversation on the future of independence, a referendum bill. Not yet, I'll finish this first. We then have a response from the Unionists, finally a thinking response, apparently, of Calman in 2008. Then we have, of course, a game-changer in 2011, because what happens in 2011 is that the SNP break the bank. They do what's arithmetically almost impossible and get a majority under the Scottish Parliament system of voting. And then we get a reaction to that again. On the fuel of the fear of independence, you get a Scotland bill that was then meant to be the final line in the sand. And then this morning, we get Douglas Alexander, who tells us that that bill's now irrelevant because they think they have to go even further towards devolution max. That is the pace of change that side of the House don't recognise. And what matters here, and I'll take Mr Sneeder in a minute, what matters here is that we don't put independence against we just think it's all wrong. I want to hear from you, Mr Sneeder. You're a bright man. Give me a vision of Scotland that is current, that's relevant, that to the people in the gathering means something, as opposed to the technocratic rubbish we've had so far.
Mr Speaker, sir, the Scottish people do deserve better, and they do deserve a vision of what this country is and what it will be. And that vision starts very simply with this. For many years, Scottish people have been at the forefront of shaping the United Kingdom. Right. For many people, the empire that you discarded and said was all wrong, the Scots were architects of many parts of the empire. And if you look at the last government, whether you like it or not, there were 23 ministers from this country. You ask for it, you will listen for it. We are at the centre of the United Kingdom. We are shaping a country that is the heart of Europe. That is what we are about. And all you're doing is saying about it.
Enough. This comes back to the leadership class argument. Now, just because you two are in the leadership class doesn't mean the rest of us have to buy into it. You can take the fat cat corporate greed and say, well, that's great, we're Scottish, therefore that proves we should never be independent. The whole point about successful Scots throughout the ages is it proves the point that Scotland can be independent. You can't play that in aid. You cannot play that. Sit down. You can't play that in aid of an argument for the Union. That's an argument for why we should be independent, not an argument for the status quo. No, thank you. Sit down. Let's bear in mind where the rest of these parties are, because this debate to people outside will seem odd. that we're not talking about what the parties are actually saying at the moment. The Tories in Scotland are split down the middle between a leader who just lost by a couple of hundred votes, who has a career backing fiscal autonomy, full fiscal autonomy. The Lib Dems, of course, had a Steele Commission that backed full fiscal autonomy, and now, of course, they were a bit startled by that. And there's another thing that's been set up under Ming Campbell, which is now to look at what comes next, the bit beyond the Scotland Bill. What we take from that is this bill's not even through the UK Parliament, and it's already out of date. That's the speed of change you don't recognise. No, actually. The argument seems to be... Not really. The argument about the Arc of Prosperity, I think, has been very well dealt with in this side of the House. Well, it has, because the facts are the facts, and they tell you that in terms of GDP per capita, you're simply wrong. They're all above. It also tells you... let's just have a think about this question of why would you do this? Well, here's one reason. You're going to have more money. Why? Because you're going to be with the share of North Sea oil and gas. Well, just because... Sorry, which country in the world has got 90% of North Sea oil revenues and wouldn't count that as an asset or count it into the calculation about wealth? That's just silly. Just silly. When you go consulting with different companies, including... just as well, because I was so scared, Kevin. So when you go consulting with all these companies, you say to them, I'll tell you what we'll do, we'll look at your books, and we'll look at your liabilities, and oh my God, it's all over for you. Well, what about the assets? No, I know there's £1 trillion of oil left, but we can't count that. Nobody in their right mind would count that, Kevin, would they? No, they wouldn't get a job at McKinsey. Why? I don't know. And then, just one last argument, which we can't leave Mr Lally alone on this one, because he said that the real reason we should not become independent is because we would leave England stuck with 50 years of Tory rule. So now the best argument for Scotland not being independent is because the English, when they get up to vote, can't be bothered voting in somebody else. That's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. Mr Speaker, well, introspection might be an idea for you, maybe, after the debate. Mr Speaker, sir, the whole point about this argument is that there is now there's now constructed in Scotland an argument that says, here is a window of opportunity, and as Mr Blessing says, it is for all of the parties, all of us. It's not just for the politicians. This is a referendum. It's about the people. You get a vote, and 3 out of 4 of these people aren't even qualified to vote in the referendum. It's about the people, and it's about choices, and it's about rational, reasoned choices. You've heard a case on this side, a positive vision. You've heard nothing on that side to displace that. And on that basis alone, Mr Speaker, I beg to move.
Second up is a little piece by Stuart Bremner, who's produced many wonderful graphics and other things in the independence campaign.
When I was a child, I was taught of a long-ago battle. It was a monumental battle, an invading army and a defending one, swords and shields, bows and arrows. The attackers were somehow both bad men and good, and the defenders lost, their king dead in the sight of the sea. When I grew up, I realised that the defenders were not of my country. They were of what then was my country's neighbour, the attackers from yet further still. I felt a degree of confusion that I should have been taught something that was not of my country's past, but of the past of my country's neighbour. When I was a child, I was taught of a document written by medieval nobility to maintain their power and limit the interference of their king. The document's concepts were difficult to understand, and little but the age of the document left a lasting impression. When I grew up, I realised that the document was not written by the nobility of my country, it was written by the nobility of what was then my country's neighbour. I found it hard to understand why I should have been taught such a thing that for many hundreds of years was at best only tangentially relevant to my country. When I was a child, I was taught of a writer, a bard of great renown, whose works inspired untold numbers around the world. The writer's words and meanings, written such a long time ago in a language I could barely understand, were difficult to interpret, yet gamely I worked on. When I grew up, I realised that the bard was not of my country, although died a decade after his country and mine were first part joined. I wondered why the work of a writer who was not of my country should be so influential on the language that is most spoken in my country. When I was a child, I was taught the language named after the country that neighbours my own. I never understood why the language I spoke should be named so. As an adult, I learned of a long ago battle. It was a monumental battle, an invading army and a defending one, swords and shields, bows and arrows. The attackers were bad men and they lost, defeated by defenders whose number was half that of the attackers. When I thought back to being a child, I felt a degree of confusion that I should not have been taught something that was so integral to the foundation of the country in which I live. As an adult, I learned of a document written by medieval nobility to maintain their power and proclaim the very existence of their country. The document's concept was clear, containing an unequivocal statement of rights. When I thought back to being a child, I found it hard to understand that I should not have been taught such a strong statement of my country's nationhood and right to exist, written at a time when both were under dire threat. As an adult, I learned of a writer, a bard of great renown, whose works inspired untold numbers around the world. The writer's words and meanings, written some time ago in a language I could barely understand, were difficult to interpret, yet gamely I read on. When I thought back to being a child, I wondered why a writer of such import to my country was not a part of my language education, and why it was he wrote in a language I was not taught. As an adult, I learned of a language named after the country in which I live. I was stunned to discover that it was a language in its own right, more than a mere regional dialect of the language named after my country's neighbour, to be shunned from the classroom, fit only for the uncouth of the schoolyard. Do not get me wrong, I am glad that my education included some of the history and culture of my neighbours. To be taught naught but the history and culture of my own country would have been deeply unfortunate, demeaning, parochial. However, to have had the history and culture of my own country so thoroughly eradicated from my education was wrong. To be denied one's history and one's culture is close to being denied one's right to exist. It is to be dominated, crushed like a rebel by a mighty empire. It may well be the case that the culture and history of my country is no longer so thoroughly excised from the education of my country's children. However, it is not something of which I have any knowledge. What I do have knowledge of is not simply the commonly seen ignorance of my country's worth. I also have knowledge of the equally common and far more corrosive denial that my country has any worth at all. It saddens me greatly to be aware that so many of my fellow subjects have so little knowledge of their country and have so little confidence that we can run our own affairs. For a long time, through the denial of our past, through the denial of our culture, through the denial of our country's right to exist, we have been denied all that countless numbers around the world have as their birthright. It is time we acknowledge the worth of ourselves as a nation and as a people, no better and no worse than so many others. We have a rich heritage and a strong culture, if only we could recognise it. We have the right to exist, and we have the right to make the decisions that are best suited to our country. It is time we stood up and recognised our worth. It is time to break from the imposed ignorance. It is time to be the change.
Next up, a piece by Ian Hamilton QC, the man who took the Stone of Destiny back to Scotland.
We've taken every asset that our country has, bundled it up together and handed it over to the Westminster politicians, saying, here, do what you want with it. Maybe give us some of it back, but do what you want. And by the living God, they're doing what they want with it. The worst thing that can happen to any wealthy country is for there to be an enormous difference between the very rich and the very poor. in Scotland. We have plenty of the very poor. A quarter of our families with children are living below the poverty level. This depression is creeping up on us and squeezing ordinary people harder and harder. The people who go to food banks and soup kitchens are often people with jobs who are finding the cost of living too much for them to afford even the ordinary decencies on a Christmas table, and they've got to go for help. Nobody among our rulers in Westminster lives below the poverty level. They are all making themselves rich at our cost. Scotland has always been a radical country. We have always been the people who crossed the road to help somebody else who is in need. That has been our tradition right down through the ages. This is an unusual time that we're going through. It was brought on by the Industrial Revolution, but never let it be forgotten that the Labour Party was founded by Keir Hardie here in Scotland in an attempt to make things better for the ordinary person. Now, there have been some good people at Westminster. I think of Tom Johnson, who gave us the hydroelectric scheme, Secretary of State for Scotland, but never drew his salary as Secretary of State because he said it was an honour to serve his country. Then there was the Welshman, Aaron Bevan, who gave us the health service. And then when they put a charge on the prescriptions, which was no part of his plan in the health service, he immediately resigned and gave up all the wealth of being a cabinet minister. We have a tradition in Scotland with the Labour Party, and for that matter with the Tories, who were always a sort of avuncular party in Scotland. But these days have gone. How many Labour governments have we had since 1945, and still a quarter of our children look wistfully for what they will never own? Lay something in front of a thief and turn your back, and it's gone in an instant. Scotland has fallen among thieves, and our rulers pass by on the other side without a glance at us.
Still relevant, all of this? I think so. Let's move on. The next one is part of a speech by Robin McAlpine.
Nobody really knows how to solve these problems. We do. Move over. Let us do it if you won't. People don't. Nobody's really got much of a plan for what you can do after we get a yes vote. Yes, some of us do. Some of us really, really want to change Scotland. Stop saying that. It will end this idea that there is no real difference between independence and this sort of devolution. Well, have a read, look through it. You tell me how we create jobs now, high-paid, functioning jobs in this economy now, for ordinary young people manufacturing the renewable energy technology which will power our collective grid. Britain, the only country in Europe that doesn't own its national grid, and build those renewable technologies at our expense, for our benefit, with our hands, by our people in our country, because as a common, that's what we choose to do. That's what you can do with independence. You tell me what you can do with devolution. We can do more, but we can't turn it and we can't change it. So no more Ministry of Failure. No more Ministry of Failure. We have had enough. We have sat around, we have heard you telling us that by doing nothing it'll be better. But it's not. It's not better, and it's not good enough. And it's not enough to say, oh well, this is what the modern world is like, because this is not what the modern world is like for millions of people around this continent. People who did act as a common. People who did work together to build a better country for their nations. That is what lies ahead of us. That is the option that we've got. We can be a common. We can all be people who are common to this nation and who work between us to build it, to do it. We have everything we need in this country. We have all the skills. We have all the knowledge. We have all the will, the excitement, the buzz, the commitment. It's all here. And my God, the natural resources and the tools, the geostrategic position, everything we need to do this is here. We have it all. There is a simple question now. In 3 months, can we tell people properly about this? Can we let people who are sitting there and saying things like, I don't like that Alex Salmond. And I actually don't think that is really what people are voting on. I think that's what people say when they're confused or they're unsure or they don't know what the right answer is. I think we need to be careful about, getting too worked up about what people are saying. What we have to do is not try to battle them by picking the things they've got wrong or the things that they are worried about, but to say to them, did you say that you wanted a Scotland where you could have a house where you're secure, in an environment and a community where you feel good, where your children can go out to play, with the security of knowing that you can live a good life and pay your bills at the end of the month, in a wider community in this country and beyond where we care for each other and we build for each other, where we've got the best resources and the best facilities because we invest collectively together, and where the things that we do make us not only wealthy as a people, but proud as a people, proud of what we've done. I dream of the day when Scotland, in the face of some of the pathetic nonsense I've heard about the role of a small country in the world, I dream of the day when Scotland says, no, we're going to dedicate our oil wealth to setting up a national pharmaceuticals industry which will create patent-free drugs for the world, using our bioscience expertise to create drugs for everybody, to break the cartels, to break the monopolies, to break the assumption that this is a planet which is designed only for profit and not for the common. I'm common. I think most of Scotland's common. I think it's in our hearts. I think it's in our souls. I think despite this ridiculous effort to try and say democracy doesn't matter, what matters is what a certain pollster has concurred from a certain social attitudes survey. This week I even saw a newspaper article which says, well, we can't read too much into democracy, but we should pay a lot of attention to an opinion poll. My God, no. Stop measuring the souls of the Scots like we're some faraway tribe. This rubbish about independence isn't really anymore, is nonsense. Read our book. Have a look at what we can do. Tell me that these aren't things that we can begin now with the will and with the power. We have had 35 years of me first politics, and we all came second. It is time for a politics that puts all of us first. Thank you.
And after all these speeches by erudite, eloquent people, for the last one we're going to change the tone a little bit, because you may or may not know that for the umpteenth time, F*** Off Scotland was trending down in England on Twitter. For this episode, I'll leave you with an example of it. Here's an idiot in his car. Again, I repeat the challenge. Has any of this changed, or has it gotten worse? Speak to you next time.
Good morning, everybody. It's the 25th of April 2014. Just had Easter, had a great time, and we're just about to record a song called Hey Jimmy. Original music by Andy Davidson. Music.com. AndyDavidsonmusic.com. Called Hey Jimmy. Nice scenery. Bolters Lock in the background in Maidenhead. Beautiful area. Lovely area. Here we go. Here, Jimmy. Here, Jimmy. Hey, up the new. Hey, Jimmy, are you gonna vote? Will it be yes or will it be no? Hey Jimmy, are you gonna vote? Will it be yes or will it be no? Bah. Up the new Jimmy. Up the new. A moose, loose, a rooney's goose. Hey Jimmy, are you going to vote? Oh, will it be yes? Will it be yes or will it be no? Hey Jimmy, are you gonna vote? Will it be yes or will it be no? Hey Jimmy, are you gonna vote? Will it be yes or will it be no? Oh no. Hey Jimmy. Oh, the new. put your kilt down, Jimmy. Hey Jimmy, are you gonna vote? Will it be yes or will it be no? Hey Jimmy, are you gonna vote? Will it be yes or will it be no? Oh, smoky dope. Hey. Oh, will it be yes or will it be no? Okay.